Welcome. I am so glad to welcome our listeners today. If you're just joining us, you have stumbled across the PMV Vancouver Island podcast. Today, I'm happy to welcome with me. I'm Sarah, and with me today, I have Ellen, Natalia, Toya, and Pietro. Today, we're going to have a quick discussion about projects and nonprofits. So we'll talk a little bit about what's a project, and then we'll get into it more about projects in the nonprofit sector. Welcome, everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Pretty good.
Great. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate the time, and we're so excited to spend some time with our listeners today. Before we dig right into it, why don't I give kind of a little bit of an introduction to our listeners about what PMV VI is all about. We have, if you haven't caught up on our podcasts, go back and listen to the first one in your feed. For those just joining us, PMVVI brings together Vancouver Island nonprofits with project management volunteers. We provide tools and training for planning and execution of successful projects in the nonprofit space. So with that, why don't we get right into it? Before we do, maybe we want to talk a little bit about what each of us does with PMV and then go from there. How's that sound, everyone?
Sure.
Sounds good.
All right. So I'm Sarah, and I look after marketing and operations for PMVVI. Ellen, why don't you kick us off next?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Ellen, and I'm the outreach director, and I also work as a client relations manager.
Excellent. Toya, how about yourself?
Sorry, and I'm a client relationship manager with PMV.
Excellent. Thank you. Natalia, how about yourself?
My name is Natalia, and I am the branch director of PMVVI and FCRM as well.
Excellent. And Pietro?
Hi, my name is Pietro. I'm the VP Special Project for the Vancouver group of PMV, and one of my project is the branches. We have two branches. One is the Vancouver Island, and one is in the Seattle area.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, let's get into it. So before we talk about projects and in the nonprofit sector, I'm going to bring our listeners back to our PMBOK guide. What's a project? So a project is defined in the PMBOK guide as a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or results. Project is temporary in that it has a defined beginning and end in time, and therefore defined scope and resources. So with that in mind, what we really want to dig into today is what does a project look like in our nonprofit sector? Ellen, would you want to kick us off with talking a little bit from your perspective what a project looks like in our nonprofit sector? Because we really want to kind of share with our listeners, what do we do for our partners in the nonprofit space?
Right. Okay. First of all, if you look at just the definition of a project, generally, right, it has a beginning and an end, and it's unique. So whether it's in the nonprofit sector or the government sector or the private sector, it's a project. But I think that there could be some differences in the nonprofit sector, how the projects are managed, how they're run, what kind of resources they might have, what kind of access to budgets they might have. Their funding might be tied to grants, and there might be specific ways they have to manage that. You're working with volunteers, possibly more. So I think that there would be some things that would characterize a nonprofit project, but a project is a project. And it fits that definition. And the nonprofit projects and the people that we work with, they're doing great things in the community. They're doing things where they really want to make a difference. Their heart and soul is in it. And that also makes it really special. That's a big part of why I'm here, and I think all of us are here, is we really want to support these organizations that are doing good work in our communities and really helping their projects come alive and make that difference.
That is great. I love that definition. Thank you, Ellen. And that's such a great point you bring up about the different constraints that nonprofit partners might be facing. And it's really interesting to study. And Natalia, I'm gonna throw it over to you in a sec to really consider and dig a little deeper there is What's the difference between, projects that we might find in our nonprofits? Ellen just talked about that. And then what might be some things that for-profit projects don't face, or what might be different?
Well, in my opinion, the difference between projects in the business area and nonprofits is the resources, right? The resources that profit organizations have are way bigger than nonprofits. With nonprofits, the values are different, right? The values community service, the value is improving the life of people. In that capacity, I find nonprofits projects are more interesting.
That's great. Natalia, thank you for that. Pietro, I'm going to kind of throw this next question to you. I'd love your experience in the role you play with PMV and then PMV VI as well. If we think about a successful project manager who supports our nonprofits, I'd love to hear what might be a couple points about what you think makes a successful project manager who partners with our nonprofits.
Okay, I'd like to pick up on one thing that Ellen says, is that nonprofit often, not always, but often have volunteers involved in projects. And that makes a huge difference in terms of how you run a project. In the private sector and industry, you have employees, and you have ways to motivate employees which you don't have in the nonprofit sector. And motivating volunteers is basically quite different to me. So that's one of the big differences when you do a project in the nonprofit sector. You're dealing with volunteers who sometimes have other things going on in their lives, and you need a lot of flexibility. There's no point doing a schedule to the day when everything is going to happen, because most of the time it's not going to happen. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't do a schedule, but it has to be taken with a grain of salt. You're dealing with volunteers, and you have to be totally aware of that. On the other hand, it also makes it interesting in its own way, because motivating volunteers has its own challenges, and that's always interesting.
I love that, Pietro. Toya, I noticed you smiled when Pietro mentioned about just keeping to timelines and motivating volunteers. I think as project managers, most of us have that background, right, in being a project manager, either in our current roles or a past role, or even volunteering ourselves as project managers. And Toya, might ask you, in your experience, would you agree with what Pietro says about motivating volunteers versus motivating people in the private sector? Have you found that as well?
Oh yeah, I would agree with Pietro, because it's almost like working in public sector organization where you as a project manager might not be a functional leader. You have to get creative, which I think is one of the top skills that any project manager should have, is understanding how to motivate the people on the project team to get the work done.
Thank you so much. That is, I'm hearing you say, is it's just keeping those teams motivated is such a key factor in both nonprofits and the private sector, but especially what I'm hearing from all of you is definitely that keeping that motivation up for our volunteer project managers is key to our nonprofit success as they work with us on projects. So with that, and in that vein of nonprofits partnering with us and vice versa, let's get into a little bit about how does PMV in general, of course PMV VI, for those listening on Vancouver Island, support nonprofits in identifying projects?
We have two different ways to support nonprofit. We call them project services and advisory service. Project services is when a nonprofit approaches us and has a reasonably well-defined project ready. What we then do, we work with them to generate the position description for the volunteer project manager, which we then post and to an audience outside our organization, and volunteer project managers apply to get involved in that project. We get often approached by a nonprofit who says, yeah, there's this thing we want to do and this thing we want to do, and we don't really understand how to do it. So then we suggest to have an advisory service. And this is usually done by somebody from PMV, senior project managers and so on. And we help the nonprofit at that time to define one or several projects, although we always advise to start with one. And then if that one project on its way and goes well, they can always start a second one. But the advisory service allows or enables the nonprofit to define the project before we go through the same process I described for project services.
Great. Thank you. Now, I think what's not unique to the nonprofit sector, sometimes defining what that project is one of the most challenging parts, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And the great news story is our project management volunteers. We have a great deal of experience in that process and helping our nonprofits with really getting to the core of what the project actually is.
A lot of time it's about listening to what the people have to say and asking questions. And by asking questions, you kind of lead them towards figuring it out themselves, what actually the core project is that they want to do.
Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. Well, before we wrap up, any final things that anybody wants to share with our listeners around project management in general, PMV, or just how our nonprofit partners can best succeed when we're looking to manage their projects?
I guess I would say we're here and, we really want to support and help. And even if your project's not super well defined, we can help you with that. And we have project managers who want to work in the nonprofit sector to get experience and who really want to make that difference. So just reaching out to us. We do have workshops and training as well for basic project management skills.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the group for their time. Appreciate everybody listening in today, and a preview for next time. We will then listen for the next podcast in your feed, and we'll be talking about creating a project charter. Thanks, everyone.